I'm Tanitra Batiste, and the running back and QB rooms are filling up for the Falcons, but does quantity mean quality?
I'm Aaron Freeman, and the big question of the offseason is whether or not Trevor Simeon can fill the Easton Stick-sized hole in my heart.
What? I'm Jarvis Davis. And did Matt Ryan hire a personal assistant?
ATL! ATL!
Rise up, A-Town. It's the Falcons Squad. Everything Atlanta Falcons every week. Breaking down all the big hits and game-changing plays from the ATL. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. Straight from the ATL, the Falcons Squad Show starts now.
Welcome into the Falcons Squad Show, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. I'm your host, Tanitra Batiste. Alongside me are Locked On Falcons host Aaron Freeman and Locked On analyst Jarvis Davis. 11 Alive anchor Maria Martin will be back with us next week. The Squad Show is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. So the Falcons have added to the running back room, but is it the right Robinson? Is he the right fit? We will debate it. And seems like the Falcons might have their eye on getting somebody in the trenches. Is he the right candidate from the big town of Texas? We'll talk about that as well. And Deputy Athletic Director and Chief Marketing Officer Stephen Drummond announced somebody's going to go work with Atlanta and Matt Ryan. Interesting if Matt is actually expanding his personnel. We will talk about that as well. But first, let's talk about Tua. So Tua Tagovailoa spoke to the media for the first time earlier this week since the Falcons signed him as, we'll just say, an addition to the quarterback room. What was your biggest takeaway, Jarvis, from the conversation that Tua had with the media this week?
I think my big thing was the fact that he was a little hesitant to reveal like explicit details about his time in Miami and why things kind of went awry down there in the bottom, as the young folks say. So that's the thing that I would kind of pay attention to. I was wondering whether or not he was going to be open about it, and because it is interesting as to what happened, or people do have a lot of questions as to what happened down there. And you know, I remember a press conference where he was talking about how this was when he was in Miami last year, and he was kind of talking about how guys weren't showing up to player-led meetings and all that stuff. And I was like, man, well, who? I know if I knew my quarterback was out there talking about what's going on in the locker room to the media, I would question a whole bunch of stuff and about who you are as a person, and are you really like connected to that locker room, and what's the disconnect in the locker room that you're expressing that information to the public. So yeah, that was the one thing that I was like, okay, is he going to be transparent? Is he going to be honest and open about what went down and how things went down there? And the answer to that was absolutely not. A lot of things happened down there. Okay, care to elaborate?
Right. And I think it's very interesting that you said that, Jarvis, because I have been listening to different takes on that press conference. And some people felt like, oh, wow, it was a breath of fresh air. And Tua Tagovailoa was so open. Open about what? Because maybe he was exactly like maybe he was open about where he believes he fits in with the Falcons and just wanted to contribute, so on and so forth. But I guess for me, I'm thinking, okay, but that is the elephant in the room that's going to keep coming up until you answer the question, right? And it's going to keep
your teammates.
Yeah, right. And right. And hopefully he'll actually answer that question for his teammates, even if he doesn't answer it for the media. Because when you look at the numbers, and hey, he had one of his best games, a yard, maybe not yards wise, but 4 touchdowns wise against the Falcons last year. But then after that, you really do see a drop off, especially in the yardage, in the touchdowns, if you will. And then the interceptions go back up. And that was for like the last 6-7 games of the season. We know, Free, that there were even moments where he was benched and the team decided, hey, you're not that guy. So I don't know if I feel like he was as forthcoming as maybe it would have been good to hear him, just to, even if it was free, just him saying, hey, I'm resetting. Yes, the end of last season and the way things ended with Miami wasn't as I would have hoped, but sometimes that's all we need to hear. But for you, what was the biggest takeaway from the meeting with the media this week?
Yeah, T, I think that's what he was trying to do, but he's not as, I guess, eloquent, in terms of like expressing that, because it was kind of like, I didn't play well last year and a lot of stuff happened in Miami. And it was kind of like he was trying to like turn the page and sort of leave the past in the past, but he didn't say it as you just put it, T, where it's just like, a lot of things happened in Miami. It didn't end the way that we wanted it to go, but I'm on to Atlanta and it's the new chapter, and I'm really focused on the present and all that stuff. And so like he said things along those lines, but it wasn't sort of like a cohesive statement that would have made it clear, as I think you're talking about it, T. In the sense of like, oh, okay, like I get it. You're trying to move on. You don't want to really dip into the past, but it was just kind of the vagueness of how he kind of addressed it made it was like, that's interesting, and it just made you want to kind of poke and prod a little bit more in terms. So that was kind of my takeaway of just like, like the way that you talked about how things ended in Miami makes me more curious about how things ended in Miami.
Yes.
Exactly.
What you're going to do in Atlanta. Like, obviously, in the coming months, we'll be much more focused on what he's going to do in 2026 here in Atlanta. But for the time being, it's just like, I kind of want to talk more about what went down in 2025 with you, Tua, as opposed to what's going to be happening in 2026. So similar to Jarvis and you, like that was kind of my big takeaway from, how he addressed those things to the media the other day.
Yeah, it's almost like two things come to mind. Number one, you left me with more questions because of your answers. And number two, your answers did actually make me think, and I don't want to say just left me with questions, but they kind of made me think like, whoa, like, do we really, like, do the Falcons really know? And I'm sure they do, but how much do we really know about how quickly things went south down in South Beach? I still don't know that we know enough about that to feel confident about where maybe Tua is in his mental, regardless of what our questions seem to always be about his physical. But also the Falcons have indicated, Jarvis, that there's going to essentially be a competition at quarterback. But do you believe that there's actually going to be a competition for that starting position between Michael Penix Jr. and Tua Tagovailoa?
Yeah, I really do. I think it's going to be genuine as well, because like you just look at the situation that both of these guys are in. Both of these guys feel they have to prove themselves. And both of these guys are in a space where they have the injury questions as well. So the long-term viability or long-term investment from teams is basically kind of in the waning. It's kind of swaying in the wind as to whether or not they're going to be able to get that. So, obviously with Tua having the experience and having had success in this league, that makes sense. Obviously, he kind of has the upper hand in that particular category, but like these guys are in very similar situations. So I think that when you put those guys in the same room, and you got one guy coming off injury trying to prove himself, you got another guy with whatever happened in that locker room down in Miami, for whatever reason, it was a lot of them, but we don't know exactly what they are. Like we are right. Both of those guys are right now have their mindset on, hey, I know I can't be given anything at this point in my career, and I got to go out and prove it. So, hey, you guys, y'all figure it out. Get on the field, get out there, and y'all figure it out. Y'all figure it out on the field, and then, hey, and then we just go from there.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's going to be a true competition. I think so much of it depends on Michael Penix's health. Because I think if he doesn't come back by a certain point, I don't think there's really a realistic way that he can win the starting spot over Tua if Tua gets all the first team reps in May, in June, in July and heading into August, I don't know if there's a time window at that point in time. If, like, let's say Michael Penix isn't cleared to practice fully until like August 10th or something like that. Yeah. Between August 10th and September 10th or whenever the season starts, like, I don't know if that's enough of a runway for him to win the competition. So to me, the question is, it's really about Michael Penix's health. Mm-hmm. What's the timetable for him to come back? If he does come back in July or very early August, maybe, August 1st or something like that at the latest, then I think there's a realistic chance that it will be a true competition, at least in training camp. And then we'll see. But like, if that time window for him to come back, I don't know if we'll see him starting. But like, I think it's not going to necessarily be a true competition, but at the same time, they are going to be competing. You know what I'm saying? Where it's not like the way I think we often frame a quarterback competition is like, okay, well, this day, this guy's taking reps with the ones. And then the next day, this guy's taking reps with the ones. And we're just sort of going back and forth to sort of see who's got the best chemistry, who's the most reliable, who's the most consistent, all those various things. Like, I don't know if we're going to see that this summer, but we are going to see a situation where Tua is going to have to perform at a certain level if he's working with the ones. Penix is going to have to perform with a certain level, regardless of whether he's working with the ones or the twos. Mm-hmm. And then we get into September, and then it's going to be like legitimate. Like, well, your play is going to speak for itself at that point in time, and then we're going to determine, week 3, week 4, or something like that, who is the guy that's the best option for us at that point. But in terms of the sort of classic quarterback competition of going back and forth between who's the starter and who's not, I don't know if we're going to see that this summer, but a lot of that depends on the timeline for Michael Penix's recovery.
Yeah, and Jarvis, Tua may have a thought one way about whether or not it's a quarterback competition, whether it's the traditional one that Free has mentioned or a variation of a quarterback competition. But what do you think? I mean, do you think it's a real competition there between Tua and MPX?
Yeah, I mean, I think he believes that. I think Tua
believes that.
Yeah, because and that's what matters at this point, because like, you want guys to have that in their mind that, hey, there's nothing guaranteed here. Like, they signed me to a veteran minimum contract, so I have all the things in the world to prove. Because if I want to get anywhere near back to what I was making and when I re-upped in Miami, I have to go out there and perform. Like, I have to. Like, it's a contract year. Therefore, for a lot of guys in this league, or who played in this league, that's all the incentive in the world to go out there and do well. So yeah, if Tua believes it, and if Michael Penix believes it as well, he knows this is a whole new regime. The general manager that drafted him and the coach that came out and said that he believed in him and he's the starter, and he was very definitive about it as well. For the world to hear and see, those folks are gone. Those goes out the door. Those cats are out the door. So yeah. Well, you got two guys who are sitting here saying to themselves, all right, I got to prove myself. And a lot of times it ends up being a good thing for the team, because like, you're going to get both of these guys' best effort.
Put a pin in that one, Jarvis, because I'm coming right back to it, because you just said something that made me think about another angle to this whole storyline. But Aaron, before we go there, wanted to ask you as well. Yeah, we may look at it and may believe on some level it's a true QB competition, although it may be a little bit of a slight variation from what it normally is. But do you think Tua believes he's in a true QB competition to get that starting job?
Yeah, I think, piggybacking on what Jarvis said, I think both of the quarterbacks going into the situation are going into it with the mindset of, my play has to speak for itself. I have to go out there and earn the starting spot. I have to prove myself for this coaching staff. In Tua's case, I got to go out there and prove myself to a brand new locker room, as opposed to what he's experienced in Miami these last couple of years, when it was very clear.
Whatever that may be, Free.
But it was very clear that he was the guy, when they took him with the top 5 pick back in 2020. Like, it was his team and whatnot, similar to, as Jarvis said, the expectation with Michael Penix being that top 8 selection under the previous regime. It was going to be his team. And obviously you have two guys that are approaching it with that mindset. So they're approaching it like a competition. To me, the question is just going to be, is the coaches going to look at it in the same way that those guys are looking at it? That's, there's two sides to the coin. And it's like the one side, we know those guys are going into it, the players are going into it like it's a competition, but are the coaches going to treat it like it's a real competition? That I think is what remains to be seen.
Right. I think that's one thing, Free, that remains to be seen. And also, I go back to Jarvis, the social media post from Michael Penix Jr. a couple of months ago that had all of us kind of raising our eyebrows and saying, whoa, what does this mean? Like, where does that mean that Michael Penix Jr. is? And while it's not the same situation that Kirk Cousins found himself in when, lo and behold, you're paid all this money, you're told you're going to be the starting quarterback, and then the Falcons turn around and draft a quarterback. It's not quite that, but how does Michael Penix feel about this? You got Tua Tagovailoa, who's in position to prove himself, which could be advantage Falcons because they'll get him playing at his highest level because he does want to get a lengthier contract, paid what he's been accustomed to getting paid, whether it's with the Falcons or elsewhere. But I mean, if you're Michael Penix Jr., how do you feel about this?
If I were to give the young man from down bottom the true serum,
yes,
I think he would come out and say, yeah, man, like, good luck, young fella, because I'm going to be back. I'm going to be compete. I'm going to compete at the highest level I possibly can to make sure you're not the starting quarterback for this team. Now, is that possible, like Free mentioned? Because like I said, if you aren't fully healthy, if you aren't cleared to play until this summer, that means Tua getting all these snaps in OTAs. He getting all this time with Drake London. He getting all this time with Kyle Pitts. He getting all the time with Bijan Robinson. Like, he's just getting all the work that he can possibly get at that number one spot. And you're sitting on the sideline saying, like, man, you just working out off to the side in your little rehab joint, got your little jersey on that, you're not really sweating like that, because, like, hey, man, we don't want you to go too hard, we want to push yourself, like he's getting reined back in while doggone Tua is out there just letting it fly because he's 100% healthy. He even said himself, Tua, that they were actually kind of surprised how well good a shape he's in as far as like from an injury standpoint. So yeah, this is, if I'm Mike, man, I'm sitting there like I'm slick, kind of a little upset, not at the team, but at his situation, because he can't go out there and like really fully compete at this moment.
Yeah, I think, trying to get inside Michael Penix's head is sort of the big journey that we all want to sort of go on at this point. Like, is this going to be that sort of chip on your shoulder sort of moment that we know he's played with in the past with the injuries and coming back from the injuries at Indiana and no one believes in me and, Heisman finalist, all that stuff at Washington and all that stuff, national champion. That you got the best version of Michael Penix there towards the end of his college career with that sort of chip and out to prove himself. And like, obviously there's a lot of upside to, him playing that way and coming and approaching it that way here in Atlanta to go out there and put his best foot forward. So, you imagine, given what we know about Michael Penix and given what we've seen about him and the way that we assume he's wired, like, he's going to have that chip on his shoulder. And so will it lead to him putting his best foot forward, I think, is the big question, or will it lead to him maybe pressing a little bit, right? We saw this with Kirk Cousins when he had Michael Penix breathing down his neck. He was started to press a little bit, and that led to Kirk playing some of the worst ball we've seen him play in a long time towards the end of that 2024 season. And so, is Michael Penix going to approach it in the same way where he's going to go out there, well, I have to go out there and win the starting spot with every throw that I make? And if he does, if he approaches it that way, like, that's not, I don't think, going to help him out in that situation. Or does he sort of be like, look, I just got to take it day by day and chip away at this thing, and eventually I'll get my opportunity, and I just got to prepare to be ready for when that opportunity comes? I think that's probably the smarter approach, but it's going to be fascinating to kind of see how he deals with it.
Yeah. Very intrigued by that because, again, I don't see it as the same situation as you mentioned, Free, of Kirk Cousins feeling like MPX is breathing down his throat. But on some level, you got to feel like it's it feels like it's applying pressure. So the Falcons have added to the running back room, but is another Robinson the right fit? We'll take that under further review. What if sports was traded in the way that maybe stocks are traded? You can buy or sell your positions live all game long, and you can use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. But think about that. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house. It's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood prediction markets changes the game. It's people moving the action, so when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actually take part live in a market powered by people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play-by-play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood, now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. Thank you for making the Falcons Squad Show your first listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. So, Free, according to multiple reports, the Falcons are signing former Commanders and 49ers running back Brian Robinson. It's a 1-year, $2.5 million deal, according to Ian Rappaport of NFL Media. But what does the signing of Brian Robinson do for the Falcons training room, running back room, rather?
Well, it gives them an experienced replacement for Tyler Algier. It gives him a player that has a similar skill set as Tyler Algier, which is much more of that physical downhill grinder type running back that can kind of eat maybe some of those short yardage and goal line carries, much to the chagrin of fantasy football owners everywhere, that Bijan Robinson could have, and maybe give them just a nice sort of change of pace for more of that physical runner that the Falcons are looking for to complement Bijan, to take some of the wear and tear off of him. And I think that's really what it does. You saw Brian Robinson, not necessarily live up to the expectations as the RB1 in Washington for a couple of years, and then go to San Francisco as that RB2. And, on a much more limited workload, I think was a little bit more efficient as a runner in San Francisco last year, playing behind Christian McCaffrey. And maybe some of that's owed to, playing behind a better offensive line, all those various things. But I think he's a good candidate to be an RB2. Has experience as an RB1. So in the event, that someone Bijan goes down with an injury, you have a guy that's been there, done that, rather than, if the Falcons went into the draft and drafted a running back, which I still think is on the table, you would have a guy that is maybe a little bit more unproven at the NFL level. So I think it sort of sets a floor for their running back depth, which I think they needed to do with Algier out the building. And so I think they got a pretty solid running back, but, probably not quite as good as Tyler Algier, but I think given the parameters, you get what you pay for. Like Tyler Algier walked for $6 million, you're getting $2.5 million, so you're not quite getting the same caliber of running back, but you're getting relatively decent bang for your buck in a similar player.
Yeah. And for you, Jarvis, what does this signing of Brian Robinson mean for this team as far as expanding the running back room and, as Aaron mentioned, being that replacement essentially for Tyler Algier?
I think it's a matter of getting a guy in here who can be the opposite, so to speak, of what Bijan Robinson brings to the table. Now granted, he's an all-world back, and we know he walks on water, and he's one of the best running backs they ever put on the Falcons uniform. And already, that's what Free said. I ain't said that.
Yeah.
I'm not there yet. I'm not there just yet. But when you talk about a guy that you can switch things up a little bit after they've been chasing around Bijan and ankles been broken off for the first 3 quarters of the game, and you just need somebody to run straight at them, a battering ram, and a guy who can bring that power that Algier used to bring last year. I think this is the perfect guy for the job. When you look at how things are and set up for him. So I really believe that Ian Cunningham is doing his due diligence, and he's understanding where they are financially. And Brian Robinson is another signing that I feel is going to add value, right? For you want to get bang for your buck for a guy like a Brian Robinson. So yeah, this is reduced meat free agent class that is just continues to get better. Just keep digging and digging and digging, and he just keep coming up with that brisket that's like $20 when it's normally like $85, $90. Like, this is like, I love this type of stuff, man. I live and breathe this, T. I don't know if you can tell or not. This is great. I love it.
I can. Oh my goodness. You gotta love it, Free. Like the level of analogy is, I'm not even sure what to call it. I'm just speechless. Yeah, I mean, I just don't even know. I'm just gonna leave it alone. I'm gonna leave it alone. But yeah, I like the signing. Of course, after Algier parted ways to go to the Cardinals, and then the 49ers, of course, acquired Brian Robinson just for a little bit of insurance for Christian McCaffrey, if you will. Didn't need him, so he didn't finish with a whole lot, if you will, but he did score a couple touchdowns, averaged 4.3 yards a carry, and maybe also sneakily important, he worked as a kick returner for the 49ers as well. So that could prove to be valuable for special teams. The Falcons also announced, Aaron, that they signed free agent quarterback Trevor Simeon Wednesday. What do you think his role will be for this team in 2026 as it relates to the quarterback room?
Making those preseason games very, very interesting. That's basically what Trevor Simeon's job is to do, because he's going to get the bulk of those preseason snaps. Like, I think we, unlike the previous head coach, Kevin Stefanski does like to play his starters in the preseason for at least a game. So I do think we will get to see Tua. We will get to see Michael Penix if he's healthy enough in the lead up to the preseason. But we know the bulk of those preseason snaps are going to the third quarterback, just like last summer with Easton Stick. And like I said, at the top, I need Trevor Simeon to come out here and make these preseason games compelling, right? I know, most of our listenership is going to be checked out about midway through the second quarter. They'll be excited for that first game. Oh, Falcons football's back. And then that first couple of drives, it'll be like, oh yeah, I forgot it's preseason football. And then they'll check out. But the rest of us who have to do these post games are like, no, we're locked in for all four quarters. And we need you, Trevor, to make it interesting for all four quarters. And that's all. I don't need you to be great. I just need you to go out there and take care of business for the bulk of these preseason games, so that we can have something to talk about in these post games. And then, because of the injury concerns with Michael Penix and Tua Tagovailoa, there is a chance, again, we're all rooting against this possibility, but there is a chance that, we might need you in the regular season at some point, because these two guys don't have the most illustrious history when it comes to staying healthy for an entire season. And so Trevor Simeon gives you a guy that started, 30 some odd games in the NFL, has had some degree of success. If you go back all the way back to his time in Denver, and again, it wasn't because he was out there, wheeling and dealing and making people forget about Peyton Manning in those years after they won the Super Bowl. But it was just basically just manage the game. You got a great defense. That's all you got to do. And that's kind of what the Falcons are hoping for. Hand the ball off to Bijan, throw the ball to Drake London. Okay. Right. And let the defense go out there and win the games. And like that could be a acceptable formula for the Falcons if they are forced at some point during the regular season to go down to their QB3.
Yeah. And of course, Jarvis, Aaron is referring to 2016, 2017, Simeon's second and third year in the season that saw him throw for 3,400 yards, almost 2,300 yards, respectively, 18 and 12 touchdowns, respectively. Unfortunately, that last year he had more interceptions than touchdowns. So there's that. But to his credit, in the games that he'd gotten into in 21, 22, 23, the last time there were stats for him, the last time he really took the field, his interception numbers went down. So maybe that's something to be a bit encouraged about. But ultimately, when you look at the signing of Trevor Simeon to add to this quarterback room, what do you think his role is going to be?
Oh, he's going to be the guy that we all hope never plays. That's going to be his job. Like, like, can we not see Trevor Simeon in the regular season? Aaron, I don't even know why you brought that up, man. You putting that bad juju out there, dog. Don't do those stuff like that, dog. I just want to see Tua or Mike. Like, that's it. That's all I want to see this year. So yeah, I think the more we don't see or talk about Trevor, is the better for me, because he's a backup quarterback. Trying to find a job. Get that retirement. You know what I mean? Like, once you get that, you get vested, baby. You know what I'm saying? Like, hey, you just working on the afterlife at this point. So yeah, I think Trevor is a guy that he's a signing that it makes sense. Because you want to have a veteran type guy in that slot because of the injury history. That's the reality, right? I gave you my dream scenario. We don't have to see him, but the reality of the situation is that he could potentially play, and you don't want an undrafted free agent from 2026 sitting in that third string spot. And here you come week 4, Tua's doggone got another concussion, God forbid. And Mike isn't quite ready to play, So yeah, you don't want to be in that situation. I'm sure Kevin Stefanski is done with the whole young quarterbacks playing and going out there and trying to have to answer questions about whether or not why this guy isn't playing over this guy. So yeah, we don't want to see that. I don't want to see that. I don't want to have to talk about that either.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, even if both of these quarterbacks are healthy for a good stretch of the season, but then for some reason you do need that third reserve coming in later in the season and you're fighting for your life to win the division, you'd like to think that a veteran presence might at least be able to be the game manager that you need so that you don't lose any critical games down the road. And of course, Joe Flacco re-signed with Cincinnati. So that conversation of Joe Flacco coming to fill out the running back room was answered. Yes, exactly. So good situation for him because he's a backup for Joe Burrow, signed with them again, and it's all worked out. But yeah, that also put Joe Flacco coming to Atlanta to rest, because that was actually the conversation, not just for him to be QB3, but really for him to be QB2 for the Falcons. Now, seems like the quarterback room is for the most part filled, and we can, for the most part, move on. What we cannot move on for, because the day has arrived for us to be literally inundated ad nauseum with mock drafts. So they're here, and some of them are saying the Falcons are looking to fill up things in the trenches. We'll unpack it next up. This episode of our squad show is brought to you by Home Chef. This time of year where all you really want is something warm, easy, and satisfying, well, that's why Home Chef has become such a go-to. It takes the stress out of dinner and makes it simple to actually enjoy cooking again. Home Chef makes cooking easy with fresh, pre-portioned ingredients, simple recipes, and meals that taste great. So your meals are quick, from 30-minute recipes to oven-ready options when you don't want to think. Tons of variety, over 30 meals each week, so it never feels repetitive. And the quality is legit. Even chef-inspired recipes from names like Gordon Ramsay and Giada de Laurentiis. And everything's portioned out, so there's less prep and cleanup, and it just makes dinner feel manageable, even on the busiest days. So for a limited time, Home Chef is offering listeners 50% off and free shipping for your first box, plus free dessert for life. Go to homechef.com/lockedonnfl. That's homechef.com/lockedonnfl for 50% off your first box and free dessert for life. But you must be an active subscriber to receive the free dessert. So, Jarvis, we have finally reached mock draft season, because we're about a month out from the NFL draft, and actually about a month to be exact, because sometime, at least for those who have a first-round draft pick, we're a month and a day away for those who don't. But ultimately, mock drafts are upon us, and the latest ESPN mock draft actually has the Falcons taking Max Ahanachor, the offensive tackle out of Arizona State. So would you be okay with Ian Cunningham going that route at 48?
Absolutely. 1000%. Yes. Let's do
Look
it.
at
Bring
the
him in.
smile on his face.
Because like this is like Aaron and I have had these conversations on Locked On Falcons for quite some time. Smart drafting, like thinking about the future, thinking ahead, having foresight, understanding what your roster is, understand that your roster is going to get older at some point. Understand that your roster is going to start getting injured at some point. understand that your roster, needs guys who are super talented and they cheap as all get out. Some of that good cheap labor. Max Ahanachor will be one of those guys. He'll be amazing cheap labor, because the one thing that I really, really like about him, this man is an absolute just meanie. He's a meanie. He's a big old meanie. T. Like, he's just a guy that, he didn't play high school football, so kind of a late bloomer, right? So, but like when you see him out there on the field, and specifically when he was down at the Senior Bowl, going to the one-on-ones in that pass rush, Aaron and I sitting there watching him, he's like, oh man, this is the type of dude that, the Falcons might need to bring in, and then if he ends up being available, because I thought the momentum was pushing for him to kind of, get into on the back end of that first round and early second round. Yeah. But if he's sitting right there, oh my gosh, Ian Cunningham better run that card up to that podium, because this guy is going to be a guy who's going to be able, he might not plug in, you might not need him this year, which is totally fine. But oh my gosh, he's going to plug into one of those spots at a tackle spot as soon as Jake Matthews or Caleb McGarry is out that door.
Yeah, and Max Ahanachor has earned a 72.5 overall Pro Football Focus grade for last season. That's 68th, but that's out of 632 qualified offensive tackles. He played 860 offensive snaps last season. So yeah, I think his numbers are pretty darn impressive. And like you said, Jarvis, depends on which day of the week it is. Sometimes he still is graded or projected to go in the high second round or the low first round. But Aaron, if he happens to be there at 48 or even somewhere in the vicinity where Ian Cunningham wouldn't have to give away a whole heck of a lot to get him, would you be okay with him going after Ahanachor at 48 or somewhere in the vicinity?
Yes, I think so. He's on that short list of players that are, as Jarvis said, could go late in round one, but also could slide into round two, and sort of the guys that I think you're kind of circling if you're the Falcons, of being like, oh, you will just stick and pick at 48 to kind of see, who's going to slide to us at this spot. And I think him, particularly at the offensive tackle position, is kind of the perfect fit for what the Falcons are looking for, because you have that guy that, as Jarvis said, has a disposition that's very similar to Caleb McGarry, right? Has some experience playing right tackle, maybe a little bit more of a project than necessarily a immediate plug and play, and that's going to, I think, affect his status in this draft. But because it's not necessarily the strongest or deepest, I should say, offensive tackle class, there's going to be a bunch of offensive tackles that go in round one, but where they go, you wonder. And he's in that sort of second tier of offensive tackles that once you get past like the first 4 or 5 guys that are expected to go in the top 20, does that push up the rest of the guys? And so there you get Ahanachor going pick 26, 28, somewhere like that in late round one, or because teams don't necessarily see him as a plug and play starter, maybe he slides a little bit, and then the Falcons can get him, not with the expectation you're going to come in and start right away, because Jake Matthews and Caleb McGarry are expected to be that guy. But, particularly in 2027, when the guaranteed money on Caleb's contract runs out, you could potentially put him in a position to slide right into that right tackle spot and get a very similar player. And unlike maybe some of the other projects the Falcons may be targeting later in the draft at offensive tackle, I think Ahanachor has enough that you can be expected to think, okay, he might not be instant starter year one, but year two, he should be ready to go for that spot for the Falcons. And so I think he makes a ton of sense for the Falcons at 48. It's just kind of a question, as Jarvis said, like, is he going to be there? Because you don't really know, because he plays that premium position, and there's going to be teams that are out there like, we need an offensive tackle, and even if he isn't ready to go day one, we need to get somebody in the building, and that could lead him, going somewhere between pick 28, 38 or whatever, but also sliding to 48.
Indeed, yes. And pass blocking grade for him, 78.3, again, out of the 632 qualified tackles, 74. It's still not bad. Allowed 14 total pressures in pass pro and no sacks, and just 3 hits allowed to opposing pass rushers. So while he may have a high ceiling, if you will, there's certainly things that he showed in last season that say, hey, maybe he'll get to that high ceiling faster than some are giving him credit for. Now, Jarvis, if Ian Cunningham decides not to go with Ahanachor or even any offensive tackle at 48, what position and player or players would you prefer him to go after?
Ooh, T, I'm glad you brought up the fact that it's mock season, because I just completed my first mock draft of the 2026 year, and I'm really satisfied with it, because when you look at in that 48, I didn't do any trades because I wanted to be authentic with this thing. You know who I end up taking at 48? Aaron, you're very familiar with him. Grayson Halton. The defensive tackle. Oh my gosh. Out of Oklahoma T. Oh, he's one of those dudes. He's one of those guys where, you want him to walk in the back alley with you. If somebody say they're about to jump on you, you're one of the first people you're gonna go grab. Like, oh man, Grayson, man, they trying to jump on me back here. Oh, bro, don't worry about it, big dog. I got you. He ready for a fight. So yeah, I think he's one of those guys that, when we look at, defensive tackle spot, this is a spot that I feel like they need to get younger and cheaper. That's why they allow David Onyemata to walk out of the door. And you got to get some talented guys in there. Thankfully, you got Brandon Dorless. Thankfully, you got Zach Harrison that can work down inside as well, kind of fluctuate between the heavy nickel end down to the defensive tackle spot. But, yeah, I think you need to get younger and get a guy like a Halton in here that can penetrate, get off the ball, GTFO, as my boy Nate Ali says, and because he's a guy that is a prime candidate for that style of defense.
And what about you, Aaron? When you think about a player who could possibly go at 48, if Ian Cunningham decides not to go with Ahanachor, what player or players, or even what position would you like to see him maybe use that pick for?
Well, I'm very curious about the cornerbacks, right? Because we've been talking now for a couple of weeks about like the one position the Falcons haven't really addressed this free agency is to try to upgrade that CB2 spot. And I'm wondering, will the Falcons have an opportunity to do that in the draft? Because again, cornerback's not one of those positions that I think relative to some of the other spots is super, super deep. I think you can get good players there, but in terms of that, like plug and play, oh, this guy's taking Mike Hughes' job, I really kind of think the only real opportunity for the Falcons to land that type of player is at pick 48. And so I'm looking at guys like Chris Johnson out of San Diego State, Brandon Cisse out of South Carolina. I think two very talented corners that have that upside that you could see them be plug and play starters for this team. And whether or not they're going to be there at 48, as I mentioned before, is like there's a bucket of players that I'm like, they're probably going to go earlier than pick 48, but you just kind of are just waiting and seeing to see, what good player that should have been, a top 35 pick or whatever, that just always one or two guys that kind of slide down there into the mid 40s where the Falcons are picking. And you just sort of like, oh, we got a guy that we didn't think was going to be here at this point in time. And those two corners are two guys that I have my eye on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, Free, because I was thinking to myself, I feel like, although I'm going to say this term loosely, right? Because I agree with you. I don't think I've seen that move. Have the Falcons made moves? Sure. But have we seen that move? That corner, not so much. And I think maybe because we haven't seen that move at corner, it kind of tells you that, okay, or maybe I'm thinking it tells me that, right? Because you look at a move like a Darnay Holmes, okay, that's a depth move, if you will. But I feel like the Falcons ultimately, with the moves that they've been making in free agency, it kind of tells me whether it's 48, whether it's their second round pick or the next pick. I feel like they're saying, yeah, we're just going to maybe hedge our bets on one of the corners in this draft being a guy that we can put opposite AJ Terrell and maybe finally invest in that youth, but that youth that has a high ceiling, but still can come in and deliver some results. Because when I look at the depth chart, to me, it still looks like just what we've been calling it for the last few weeks, which is depth, and taking nothing away from quantity. But I do think at that particular position, there's still a need for some quality as well. So Matt Ryan visited Athens last week and reportedly has an assistant on his staff from Athens this week. We'll tackle that in the look ahead. Welcome to the 5-Hour Energy Flavor Draft with 18 different flavors to choose from, including new options like confetti craze, fruity rainbow, or cotton candy. There's something for everyone. So the board is set, the flavors are ready, and I've got my number one pick for the 5-Hour Energy Flavor Draft. Although I will admit it's kind of like these mock drafts that we're seeing, because every time I come to you guys, I have a different flavor that I'm picking. So bear with me, but it's because I love them all. I am someone who believes in 5-Hour Energy. I use it all the time, especially when I have days where I have 2, sometimes 3 shows. So let me tell you about the flavor that I'm kind of feeling this week. It's cotton candy. It's like a swirl of sugary clouds, fruity twist, hint of vanilla, the sweet side of tasty caffeine, if sweet works for you. It's a throwback flavor, but it has a little bit of a boost. And also it's your sweet tooth fix, but without any sugar guilt. So I'm going to go with cotton candy as my number one pick this week. And like I said, it's very light, it's very airy, and I kind of like sugar without the guilt. So that's kind of why I'm looking to do that. But also you might want to go with a confetti craze or fruity rainbow yourself. And with confetti craze, it's something that isn't overly sweet, but you do have like this taste of confetti cake, vanilla frosting, sprinkle of sweetness. Fruity rainbow, you have sweet layered fruit notes, you have multi-fruit taste, and you have a very smooth and easy drinking texture. So 5-Hour Energy shots give you a boost. And the most important point is that it's with 0 sugar. It's a lot of upcoming flavor innovations that they have planned. So, hey, you never know. They may have something planned for you that you want to see, or that you want to see come back. So find your new favorite flavor of 5-Hour Energy shots, available only at 5hourenergy.com. Again, that's flavor of your 5-Hour Energy shots, any of the ones I mentioned, or it may be a classic like grape, which is my favorite. And those are available online at 5hourenergy.com or Amazon, 5hourenergy.com or Amazon for your 5-Hour Energy shot. So Aaron, Deputy AD and CMO Stephen Drummond, who was at UGA previously in that role, the UGA Athletic Association, he is now a member of the Falcons team. They announced today that he is being added to their front office as the SVP of Communications. So Stephen Drummond, he will be the senior leader responsible for shaping, protecting, advancing the team's narrative. But before he was in Athens, he actually spent 22 years in the NFL with the Panthers, with the Jaguars, served as a VP of football ops and senior advisor to ownership, and also oversaw football operations like equipment, video, football, IT, that sort of thing. But what does the hiring of Stephen Drummond mean for you, especially because, you know, we're always trying to link things together, and there were the Falcons deep in Athens last week, and then we get this announcement this week about Stephen Drummond being added to the staff, the front office.
Tia, you're suggesting it was a recruiting trip for the Falcons?
Could be.
Yeah, I think I think this is a sign that Matt Ryan is, sort of building his crew, of like we're not going to be in it. We're not making football decisions, but we're going to be in the background. And as you mentioned, Drummond spent many, many years in Carolina, serving in a sort of similar role, working a variety of roles, including, being not the president of football, but just the vice president of football operations, which is very different from Matt Ryan's role, who's the president of football in the entire galaxy. But I think the Falcons are getting someone who has some experience doing some of the things that Matt Ryan is going to be doing in the background. And so it was a smart move for the Falcons to get someone who has that NFL experience. And of course, just been the last couple of years been working right down the road in Athens and whatever. And sort of, but hey, since we're here, you want to pop over a couple miles down the way, down a Flowery Branch and see what's what and hang out, and maybe you like it here better here, And so it seems like that was the case for the Falcons.
Yeah, that in our minds, that's kind of how we would like to believe it played out, right? But I do think it's interesting because remember, Jarvis, at the beginning of the season or the beginning of the year where the Falcons made the announcement that Matt Ryan would become the president of football. And at first, everyone was calling him the president of football operations because that's what most teams have. And the Falcons were adamant, nope, he is the president of football. Interesting, because Stephen Drummond has background as the president of football operations.
Well, sometimes you gotta surround yourself with good people, right?
Yes.
This is the type of move that seems like that. This just seems like that. This is what this is. So for me, I look at Drummond as a guy that is going to be able. Is someone that Matt Ryan's going to be able to lean on in certain situations. Now, when it comes to like straight up ball, talking to prospects or talking to guys who are coming on the 30 visits or whatever, like he don't need no help in that category. But yeah, when it comes to like, okay, what was your particular approach to how we looked at this general manager or this financial salary cap person that we're going to be looking at? Okay, all right, Steve will come in and say, all right, here's what I did when I was in Carolina, blah, blah, blah. Those are the type of things that I feel he's going to be able to help Matt in that particular department. So this is like Aaron said, we're going to see what the connections that Ryan is going to be able to tap into as he kind of continues to kind of solidify himself as the guy. So, I think about Tua and how he was referring to him. He's like, Matt was part of the process and being in there and understanding that, so it's almost kind of weird to kind of see Matt being talked about at this point, because we were so used to talking about him as the quarterback of the football team. And now he's kind of like the semi-quarterback of football for, from a front office standpoint. I didn't quite tie that like I thought I was when it was in my head and then kind of come out like it was supposed to. But y'all understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know y'all feel me at some point, at least a little bit.
The president of football, Jarvis.
Yeah,
of all football. All football that's ever been played in this entire galaxy. He is the president of.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so he's the P for it. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I think this is obviously is a good hire, but I do think it is kind of interesting that not too long after they were 30 plus deep down there, and then next thing you know, somebody getting a job, somebody getting a promotion. And by the way, T, I don't need you to be disrespectful, ma'am, because we all know that Atlanta is a million times better than Athens, right? We do understand that, right? I know we're not putting that little A city in the same sentence as the big A, Atlanta, right? We know that is 1,000,000 times better than that little A city.
Well,
up 316.
Well, when you kind of think about the football success, it becomes a big A.
No, I'm talking about we talking about a good time, T. We ain't talking about no football. We talking about a good time.
But are we talking about football? It's a squad show talking about football.
We talk about football, but hear me out though. If you're trying to sell someone on where to live for the next 5 years of their life, and most of the time, the demographic for those people are 22 to 26, African American. You tell me what city they want to live in. Atlanta or that city of 316. Come on now. Come on, man.
Well,
what are you talking about here?
It is definitely, it's
Atlanta.
Nothing compares to this city. I will say that. I've had this conversation over and over as somebody who's moved to the city, left the city, moved back, left, moved back, and it's probably going to be another one of those left the city soon. But yeah, no, it does not compare. But I was thinking,
something to tell us.
Well, but I was thinking that for why, Free? You do know you're gonna have to save us in a minute. Why?
I know. That's what I'm just like always.
Hold your mule, because you are going to have to save us in a minute. But yeah, no. I think Atlanta is a fantastic city. That's why I keep coming back. But I think ultimately you do have there's something brewing there, right? Because we know that the Falcons a couple of weeks ago announced that they had parted ways with their SVP of communications. And hey, sometimes that's typical when you have a new regime, if you will. Then it's not always the case that you're going to keep someone, although there was familiarity with at least Matt out of the front office with the former SVP. But again, sometimes you just want a clean shop. And then you look at one thing, and I do mean this one actually seriously, the UGA has had a lot of challenges in the last 4 or 5 years as it relates to their brand and some of the questionable moves that their players have made off the field. And they have really perfected, I feel like, what goes on in Athens stays in Athens, or we keep it in-house, or we're going to couch the messaging the right way to make sure that it does not tarnish the G. And that's a part of his job. A part of his job is making sure that the Falcons brand and that messaging, one way or the other, good or bad, comes out with the Falcons smelling like roses. That's a part of his job. So I do think that you can't probably get someone better because of all the things that that program has had to face in the last few years and how they've actually managed it pretty comfortably and pretty cleanly. So yeah, I could kind of see that being a good move for Matt Ryan, but ultimately, like you said, for Stephen Drummond, I mean, who wouldn't want to come just a few minutes up the road on 316, get back into the NFL and make some things happen, but also with an eye on what's going on in Athens to be able to shift and move should the Falcons decide that they want to go in the direction they started to go into, which is picking or selecting dogs at the top of the draft. This is a guy who could tell you even more so than just the coaching staff. Hey, yeah, there's some different ways to look at it. So no, I hear you. Nobody would ever say no to the city if they're smart.
Yeah, I think you make a great point though, because someone like a Drummond who was in that building, who better to ask, like, hey, what you think about this guy? Or how is this guy in this particular situation? Because the NFL is going to do their homework now.
Yes.
And like, okay, should we ignore this arrest off the field? And I'm not saying anyone specific, but just using that example, like, hey, like, what was this situation, or what happened in this particular situation? I think Drummond will be able to give you some good insight, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see that an uptick in guys that the Falcons take down there.
Yeah, and Aaron, Jarvis also made a great point too. And like you said, we're not calling any player out or trying to belittle or demean any player. But yeah, when you have a guy like Stephen Drummond, who has been there through the days of the Jalen Carter situation and others, to be exact, and now the Falcons are facing a similar situation with James Pierce Jr. in terms of what the messaging will be, how they look at players, are they looking deeply enough into it, so on and so forth. Like, I think you probably have a guy that has had enough experience to know if the Falcons have to manage through the JPJ PR nightmare, which they probably will, and then have to manage through making sure that they bet even, not to say they didn't bet well, but to bet even better so that maybe they avoid this situation. He's probably a good selection for that.
Yeah, and not just from his time at Georgia, but remember,
with the
in
Panthers,
Carolina, he worked under the old owner in Jerry Richardson, right?
Yes.
Who his exit was not the cleanest exit from being ownership, and then I forget the current owner's name, whatever his name
Tepper.
is, but
Tepper,
Tepper, he's not necessarily sort of a hands-off owner as well. So Stephen Drummond's probably been through some things, experienced some owners like walking into his office being like, hey, I need you to do this or whatever. And so having gone through that experience and then coming to Atlanta where you have a more hands-off owner, and particularly with the hiring of Matt Ryan being, again, the president of all football that's ever been played in the history of time. You have now Matt Ryan kind of being the sort of owner in the building and working hand to hand with that, and probably having a little bit more of a professional relationship than maybe some of those guys in Carolina. So I think his experience not only in Athens but also in Charlotte will allow him to maybe give the Falcons a leg up when it comes to navigating some of these sticky situations that we know the Falcons aren't necessarily known for getting in, but the last couple of years it's been whether we're talking about off-field issues, tampering, all these various things where it just feels like the Falcons or the team too often these last couple of years, which is uncharacteristic of this organization historically, being the team that's stepping on the rake and getting hit in the face with the rake and being like, oh, well, you're looking kind of silly at this point in time. So, Drummond can help with that, maybe avoid stepping on that rake.
Right. And that's a very good point that you make, because I think when I look at the Falcons, that's kind of what I see as well. Like, how many times did we say in the last couple of years that, oh, wow, the Falcons made a great move, whether that was in the draft or whether that was in free agency, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there was some message, whether it was pumping in noise or tampering or what have you, that seemed like it always diminished the light of and the sparkle from what they did. So yeah, I think that's a great point that you make. Maybe this is someone who can kind of help to avert that and maybe help fans, especially when you are trying to make sure that your fans buy in for yet another go round of saying, hey, this is going to be it. This is the regime. These are the players. This is our time. You don't want that narrative to be diminished by something off the field like we have actually seen for the Falcons the last couple of seasons. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Falcons Squad Show your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked on Falcons with your host, Aaron Freeman, as your second listen. The Falcons Squad Show and Locked on Falcons are part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. We'll see you next time.